Well, let's get started. And welcome. I'm glad it worked out. The technology was a touch and go for a minute there. But let's start by telling people what your Montessori story is. How did you discover Montessori?
Okay, thanks very much, Mark, and thanks for your patience. I'm a registered nurse by trade and worked in the area of aged care and dementia for well over 40 years. I guess that the older I got, the more concerned I got about aged care and how we delivered service and cared for our elders. And so many years ago, about 15 years ago now, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I saw a Montessori activities workshop being advertised, and I went along to that. And about halfway through the morning, I felt that I'd found the aged care holy grail, what I had been looking for in terms of delivery of better care, a person-centred approach, and an approach that gave people a reason to get out of bed every day. And so there began my journey to become an aged care Montessorian. And I was very fortunate to get a Churchill Fellowship that enabled me to travel the world and work with the people who were leading the way in the US and Canada. I then came back to Australia, and of course very few organisations or people had heard about Montessori, and so it was a bit of a battle trying to get the message out there, and so since that time I've been working to spread the word about Montessori and to change the face of aged care, or try to, one step at a time. So it's been about a 15-year journey, I think.
What have you most loved about being involved in Montessori education?
I think the biggest thing is just about changing outcomes and trying to get people to challenge attitudes about people living with dementia, and to look at their own practice and realise that often staff who work within aged care don't stand back and ask the question, why do we do it this way? And we've been happy with delivering custodial care that is very much based on the many rather than the person or the individual. So I think for me, it's about just getting people to look through different goggles and to see what is possible when we change how we view what we do.
Yeah. So I think most Montessorians are really, familiar with how Montessori works with the child, but how does Montessori philosophy transfer from the child to the adult, particularly the elderly?
Okay, well, it's really about, I've always said, or since my journey with Montessori began, I truly believe that Montessori is a way of life. It's not about an education system. It's about a way of living where people are respected and people are heard and people are given true choice. It's the ethos really that transfers over to aged care, one of independence, choice, high self-esteem, and meaningful engagement. It doesn't matter what age we are, Mark, whether we're 3, 6, 9, 33 or 103. Each one of us need to feel valued. We need to have a reason to get out of bed every day. And so it's the ethos that transfers over. It's not just about the children or elderly people. We're doing lots of work with mental health clients, disability services. It doesn't matter, wherever human beings exist, there is a need for people to be heard, to be valued, and to feel that they're contributing to their community and, feel that they matter. So it's not, we've really moved Montessori out of the classroom, or my work is moving it out of the classroom and into so many other areas. Montessori for children is totally different from Montessori for adults, except in the ethos. You know, we talk very much about a prepared environment. The prepared environment in a classroom is totally different to the prepared environment that we work with people with a cognitive impairment. Children don't have a cognitive impairment. They might like us to think they do at times, but they actually don't. They also don't have a full bucket of living and experience and stories and knowledge. Whereas, again, people living with a cognitive impairment have full buckets and have lived very long lives and done amazing things that they're still able to share and to tell you. They just have a cognitive impairment. So it's quite different. You know, it's a bit like what we do with Montessori for dementia and ageing is we build Montessori on top of a good foundation of dementia knowledge and best practice. So, and you put that in first, and then you build your Montessori on top of that. I equate it to, it's like putting me in a classroom. I'd be absolutely hopeless. It's a totally different environment where we put, we build our Montessori on top of aged care or dementia best practice.
Mm. Can you talk a little more about what the prepared environment looks like in aged care?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, we talk a lot about our prepared environment includes a staff, so having Montessori trained and educated and dementia aware staff. We also talk about the physical environment, wayfinding. We use a lot of cue cards. I have a shower every Monday and Thursday. It makes me feel fresh and clean for when my daughter visits. Task breakdown. We've got people toileting themselves by following a task breakdown on the back of a toilet door. One of the things that can happen for people who are living with dementia is that they lose sequencing. So they lose steps of a process. So let's take toileting, for example. They might forget to take their undies down, or they forget to wipe themselves. And when you think about how many steps are involved with going to the toilet, there are many. And so what happens when people lose part of the sequence, we then take over and we do for people. And when we do for people, we create excess disability and we take away what they are able to do with support. So our prepared environment in Montessori land is about an environment that supports independence and supports memory loss. So we use task breakdown and we give people the steps that they need to follow to be successful with going to the bathroom or making a cup of coffee or being able to heat up their Meals on Wheels, for example, in the microwave. Our prepared environment would have task breakdown in it. Signage, how can I find my way to the dining room or the office or outside if there is no signage? How can I maintain continence if I don't know where a toilet is? So our prepared environment in aged care is very much around independence, maintaining independence and, enabling the person to get around in their environment without having to rely on others.
And what about where there's physical impairment?
Okay, well, where there's physical impairment, of course, they're dependent on, if they're unable to ambulate themselves, and they're totally dependent on staff to be able to get around. But in terms of Montessori, in traditional aged care, we would see that somebody is losing the ability to lift their fork or their spoon up to their mouth. And in traditional aged care, we would say something like, Mary is losing the ability to lift her spoon to her mouth. She's going to require assistance with her meals in a short period of time, or whatever it is. In Montessori, we would say, Mary is losing the ability to lift her spoon to her mouth. We need to put in place fine motor skills and activities to maintain the skills she needs to be able to feed herself independently. So it might be that somebody has a sifting a scooping problem. They can't scoop onto their spoon. So in that case, we would put a Montessori activity in where we'd give them a slotted spoon and a container of rice or sand with something in it, like either can be sweets and can be coins, it can be little trinkets, it can be something that they've got to find in the rice or the sand. And the activity is that they scoop with the slotted spoon. That scooping and picking up and sifting the sand is the skill they need to be able to scoop their food onto their spoon. So we would put those sorts of activities on their care plan to maintain that skill for as long as possible. You know, we're very quick at taking over what people are still able to do, and when we see them failing, instead of looking through that different goggle and thinking, okay, how do we maintain that skill for as long as possible? However, dementia is progressive, and eventually most people living with dementia will lose the ability to feed themselves as their disease progresses towards the end. However, the time when that happens is often dependent on the staff who are providing support and care to that person. If we take over, then all of a sudden they require full assistance with their meals. If we put fine motor skill activities in and activities that maintain their ability to lift their hand up and to scoop their food, then they're able to continue feeding themselves for a longer period of time before they actually lose it. We've got people who have been fully assisted with meals who learnt to feed themselves again. By using a muffin tray activity, basically moving balls. So they're moving balls from one area to another, then you raise the height of the container that they're putting the balls in. So they're sort of moving balls like that. That is that. So with Montessori, it's always about what do people need, and then putting in activities or task breakdown or signage to support their needs. You know, I see so often in aged care, one of the biggest issues we see, or one of the biggest, sometimes people would say problems, or repetitive behaviours or repetitive things that I see, is that of repetitive questioning. Where's my room? Where's my room? When's my husband coming? When's my husband coming? What do I do now? What do I do now? Repetitive questioning is a good example of an environment where the staff or team members feel that the person can't learn. And so all you see those behaviours from people living with dementia. I always say, if somebody can't find their room, teach them where their room is. One of the things that we do know is that people with dementia can learn. It is a myth that they can't learn, and we're surrounded by examples of it all the time in aged care, and yet we would ask people or team members about teaching people with dementia, and they say, oh, they can't learn, they've got dementia. What changes is sometimes the period of time that it takes them to learn, just like you and I. There are people that pick up things quickly, and there are other people who it takes 30 times to learn something. And we have a learning screen that we use with people that will identify the people, whether they're able to learn or not. If they're able to learn, then that changes the whole way we care for people. And the only issue that becomes available, the only thing that becomes relevant is what is it that you want to teach them. You know, but if you have an attitude that people with dementia don't learn, we don't try and teach them where their room is, or how to manage their anxiety when they're worried about when their husband will come, or how to use a schedule to, you know, to know what they do during the day. So it's quite, it's a different way of working, and it's a different attitude, really, towards working with people living with dementia.
What are some of the problems facing aged care in this country?
How many hours have we got, Mark? Look, I think probably the biggest issue is we've got a culture of care that has taken a long time to develop, and we've got a funding system where the more disturbed somebody is, where the more aggressive somebody is, where the more unhappy somebody is, the more money we get to provide their care. Something is very wrong in a system, I believe, where the more upset people are, the more money you get. We have to, and we talk a lot about person-centred care, person-centred care, person-centred care, and yet many organisations wouldn't know what true person-centred care was. And it is because of the culture of care. I always say that this isn't about bad staff or bad organisations. This is about a shift, a paradigm shift in the culture of care. We've been delivering aged care, and yes, some things certainly have changed, but it still remains very much focused on what is the most economical and caring for many rather than for small numbers, and I know all those things impact. However, we have got organisations who have good Montessori practice. They get no different funding than anybody else, but what they do is how they change how they do it. In an industry with no time, no money, and no staff, we have staff doing things in care communities that people who live there are able to do. We wait on people who are able to pour their own drinks. Why would we do it? We create excess disability to begin with, and we give ourselves more work. Working in a Montessori care community is about changing how we do things. Just another example of what's wrong. We pay somebody in care communities to go round and get the menu choice off the residents of what people want to eat tomorrow or next Monday or tonight. I think they say research is about 85% of people living in, up to 85% of people living in care communities have a degree of cognitive impairment. They've got a memory problem. Why on earth would we waste time and effort asking people what they want to eat tomorrow? They've got a memory problem. So immediately, if you take that out of the equation and you offer people a choice at the time of meal times, then there's hours that you've changed. We pay people to plate up food. So we pay people in hospitality to stand in the kitchen and plate food. People change how you deliver food, get people choosing the food. And then they choose what they want to eat. Guess what? They eat better, and then we don't have to use the supplements that we're often using, like sustagen or high protein biscuits, because people are losing weight. It's that whole culture that we need to think about and to change. And it's very hard to change what you do. Our biggest problem is changing. Not only are many residents institutionalised, many team members who work in care communities are institutionalised. They've done it that way for so long that it's like automatic pilot. And it's very hard to get practice to change. And it slips back so easily because people fall back into what they know. That's comfortable. They've done it. And, it has positive, or they see that it has positive outcomes. Our managers will often say to me, and we don't have many complaints, and our residents are happy and our families are happy. Why should we change what we do? Families often only know the care that the person's getting. They don't have a wide range of aged care experience. So the only experience they've got is the experience of their mum or dad or partner or in care. You know, and one of the first things that we often do in a when we're looking at putting Montessori in place is we say, let's do a survey and questionnaire of families. And inevitably, they come back all very positive. And then the CEO or the Don or whatever says, well, what did that really prove? Everybody's happy. And I said, but we've now got baseline. I know that's what you would expect. I mean, there's always a few people complaining about the food and the lack of staff, but overall, people are happy generally. And then we put Montessori in place, and 6 months later, you do exactly the same survey. Then you see the differences. And people say things like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that my dad could still do that. It's so good to see mum out of a room and ironing the serviettes. She used to love ironing. You know, all of a sudden people have got something to compare the care to. And that's when you notice the difference.
So have you had challenges in getting the Montessori approach accepted in aged care?
Oh, yes. Yes.
What's the resistance?
Well, the resistance, Mark, is that everything has to change. Everything has to change. The way we employ staff. You know, we're employing staff at the moment, or many are not. Now, I'm talking generally here. There are pockets of very good practice and pockets of organisations that are doing fabulous work. So I'm making blanket statements here, but there are always exceptions. But generally, we tend to employ people for their qualifications. A Cert 3 in lifestyle and leisure, or Cert 3 in aged care. We also need to start employing people for emotional intelligence. I get asked a lot to go on interview panels. Oh, Anne, will you sit on our interview panel for our memory care unit? And I say, yeah, as long as you don't want me to ask questions on dementia. You know, I can teach, or we can teach somebody to assist somebody in the bathroom, or to assist somebody with meals. We can teach that, but you can't teach emotional intelligence. People either have it or they don't. And we need to be employing people not just for their certificates, but for their EI, the ability to walk in somebody's shoes, the ability to see the world from a different perspective. So even human resources, how we employ people, needs to change. The marketing of the organisation, there is a belief out there in the world that people move into aged care, you're going to look after my mum and dad. That's what they're coming in here for. In Montessori land, it is about, we will enable and support your mum to be the best she can be. And that means that we will support her to be as independent as possible. We're not going to dress her and bath her and pour her cup of tea if she's able to do that herself. So even the marketing of a care community needs to change. And then you've got the practices that are in place, that have been there forever, that the staff don't see as problematic. And there are many of those. For example, people in aged care are often in bed by 6 o'clock at night. And then the craziness is that at 2 o'clock they're awake, so we give them a sleeping tablet to make them go to sleep. If we want people to sleep all night, keep them up until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And then the staff say, oh, but they want to go to bed. Yes, they do want to go to bed. They've been bored to death all day. We would all want to go to bed as soon as we could possibly get there if we haven't got anything to stay up for. If you want people to stay up, they need to have activity. We employ activity staff. You know, if you're lucky, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. If you're really lucky, you've got some weekend coverage, and you're really lucky again, you've got some evening activities. But generally speaking, in aged care, activities are seen as the role of the lifestyle and leisure staff. And clinical staff do not see that activities are their role. In actual fact, you often find that there's an activity progress notes, activity notes, and then there's clinical notes. As a registered nurse, I've had my peers say to me, and activities are not clinical. That's the role of the diversional therapist or the activity person or lifestyle and leisure or whatever fancy title they wish to call them. I will always challenge that. If somebody is bored to death that they're so depressed that they want to die, that's a clinical issue. If somebody's impacted or with feces because their body doesn't move, because they sit all day doing nothing, that's a clinical issue. You cannot separate those things from being clinical. And so in Montessori, it's everybody's responsibility to make sure that people are meaningfully engaged. If you want BOWs, the 4 B's of aged care are bingo, bus trips, bowls and bows. There are 4 B's of aged care. And so the things that happen. And if you want BOWs to move, people need to move. If you've got people moving, all of a sudden they don't need the aperients that they used to have to keep their bowels moving. Why? Because they're moving. They're not sitting for hours on end. And I mean, the thing that I love about Montessori is that it is research based. Everything that we talk about is based in research. You know, you only need to look at the research of, loneliness, even malnutrition in aged care is a concern. You know, we give just the way we provide meals or don't provide meals or give people lack of choice. You know, we all know people living with dementia often don't want to sit down at 1 o'clock to eat their lunch. There are many people living with dementia who need to have small things to eat often. So, you know, we have help yourself tables where people can always find food and drink at any time up until I think about 8 o'clock at night. One of the care communities packs up their help yourself table. At another care community, it's there the whole time. Again, in traditional aged care, it's 3 meals a day. And they get morning tea, afternoon tea, and supper. So, you know, it's all of, it's a total shift in what you do. So I'm going back to your question, what are the challenges? The challenges are to get an organisation that is brave enough to go down that path, and it all gets too hard. So they might start off saying, oh yes, this is what we want to do, we're going to do this, and then the reality of what actually needs to change sets in, and then it's much easier to go back to doing what they've always done. And and as we know, do what you always done, you'll always get what you always got, you know. But it is a huge challenge, and people also can't do it off the end of their desk. You know, I have care communities who send along 2 diversional therapists with the belief that they're going to go back and put Montessori in place. Doesn't work like that. Everybody has to be trained, from the CEO, the board of management, the executive staff, right down to the handyman, the gardener, the volunteers, the families, and the residents.
Are there organisations that have done that, where any aged care facilities that do Montessori well?
Yeah, look, there are organisations that are coming along very well. There is, I mean, at the moment we've started a big job with Anglicare in Tasmania, 3 memory care units, and the lives of residents have been totally transformed. And the units that had high incidence, major problems with responsive behaviours. You know, when you change what you do, you don't get those responsive behaviours. Residents are happy. I can't, and I'm talking about that because that's a project at the moment that we're seeing such amazing changes with for and outcomes for people. You know, it's really about, you know, looking at why people behave the way that they behave. You know, we always say the more impaired the person, the more the environment accounts for their behaviour. we need to look at how we set up our environments to support people rather than rob people and increase their fear. Can you imagine what it's like to live somewhere where you've got no idea where you are or who these other people are or what you're meant to do? It's very scary for people. And so therefore people become agitated and they want to go home, and you get issues between residents. If people are bored to death, you will have major problems. You'll have, and I guess in traditional aged care again, we do things like, what's an example? Because of intrusion, we put in other strategies which are not good person-centred strategies, such as locking residents' doors to stop people intruding. If you want to stop, why do people intrude into other people's rooms? Usually it's because they're looking for something familiar, something that to them makes sense. So they go in and out of rooms, looking for something that is familiar, usually their own room. If you've got somebody who intrudes, do they know where their room is? And if they don't, teach them where their room is and they won't intrude. Locking the door to stop them going into somebody's room doesn't solve anything. They will just move on and intrude somewhere else and remain agitated and intruding into other areas. So it's, there are many elements, I guess, to setting up Montessori environments in aged care. Montessori is far more than an activity a matching activity sitting on the table. It's a culture of care. It's not something we do between 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We need to be Montessori in focus with everything we do, including our staff.
I'd like to encourage anybody listening to pipe in with a question. Does anybody have a comment or a question for Anne?
I can jump in. And so,
Jenny.
Sorry?
Yeah, and Jenny also had a comment. Maybe
sorry.
after you, Alex.
Yeah, so I'll make it quick. Firstly, I think the parallels to classrooms is quite remarkable. A lot of what you've said is you could easily see its relevance. In so many ways. Other than that, I'm wondering, like you talk about what's happening in Tasmania, and I think you and I've spoken quite a while ago about how that's being captured, like how that's being documented, and I guess my question is just, what's that looking like at the moment, to show those outcomes that are being met, or the change that's happening, because it's a new facility in Tasmania, isn't it?
No, it's not. These are all,
okay.
Yeah, no, they're not. They're Southern Cross care communities.
Yeah, and just lastly, I know that's 3, but lastly, do you find it works better in a smaller facility or not necessarily?
Yeah, not necessarily, Jenny. What tends to work better is to start in one area rather than spread it across the whole facility at the one time. You start in one area, like, for example, at Southern Cross Care, we're starting in the memory care units, mostly because often people living in memory care units are probably some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged in aged care because they don't have a voice. So we're starting in those and then we'll spread it out. But we're starting to see research happening. East Grampians in Victoria, they're in doing a research project at the moment with a Victorian university, Curtin University over in WA. They did a research project a couple of years ago on our work at Catholic Homes and at Villa Maria in Melbourne, and those, we're starting to see a lot more research coming out about the outcomes of Montessori environments, as time goes on, hopefully we'll see, more research. It's still so new, and it's still it's still so new in what we do, really.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay, so
Jenny.
my question is quite basic, is if you're going to implement Montessori for aged care, for dementia, you mentioned you would start, say, in a memory care unit. When we're talking about the classroom, we think about practical life and practical life and language. So do you take that approach in aged care?
Well, yes, we talk about classes of Montessori activities just as you do in education, and we have sensorial, we have practical life, we have culture and social, and so I guess that they're the areas that transfer over, and certainly those task breakdown and the activities to keep people feeding themselves, pouring activities to get them pouring their cups of tea again. Yes, they fit directly into daily life activities, if you like, and a lot of the sensorial ones fit certainly when dementia robs people of a lot of their abilities, then we put a lot of sensory activities in. So we talk about that in Montessori in terms of comfort care. So it's a lot of stimulating the senses and a lot of sensory activities for stimulation of the senses.
And is there a particular, if you're trying to get it sort of almost like a maximum impact so that the centre can see the effect of Montessori, can you, do you start in a particular sort of start small in effect and move out from that?
Well, we do. I guess that the first thing is to train all the staff, and then what we do is we try and encourage people to start developing their depth of knowledge by doing case studies on the residents they work with. And usually, the one thing about Montessori, and a PhD student in Canada, said in her PhD that people have to see it to believe it. A lot of people don't believe that people with dementia can do what they actually can do. And so if we're working in a care community, we only need to get one or two major changes for a couple of residents, and all of a sudden the light bulb comes on and people actually then believe in what they're doing, and because they can see the changes. It's really, that's one of the rewarding things about it, when you see somebody's life transform, and the staff are as delighted as what families are, because all of a sudden somebody who had certain behaviours doesn't have them anymore, or they're greatly minimised, and everybody is blown away by the changes. But it's hard work, because everything has to change.
Thank you.
Jane?
Thank you, Mark. And I'm curious also, when you probably have seen the programs where they have the kindergarten children come in and visit to the aged care facility, and I wondered whether it'd been proposed to us that maybe we work as a Montessori school with the aged care facility close to us. But I wondered what your thoughts were. Definitely, it seems like it'd be a lot easier to align the two. But do you see, or do you think it's more of a token effort when you watch a program like that on TV?
Yeah, look, intergenerational programs at the moment are trendy. Let's face it, and there's been in the last 12, 18 months, there's been a lot of funding for research and for programs to integrate children and older people. I think that, we have a lot of good intergenerational programs that have happened in Montessori care communities. There's a Montessori care community in Sydney where a Montessori school students, they used to go in. I haven't been in contact with them for a while now, but they used to go every week and the students would work on projects. These were older primary and high school students, I think. They would work with the older people on projects, and that was a huge success. And there was also another Montessori school that went in and they had a choir, and that was also Sydney based, where they went into a care community, Montessori care community, and they set up a choir. There is also a Montessori school in Adelaide that is built or was built, or the nursing home built next to the school, or the school built next to a nursing home, whichever it was, and they have quite a lot of connection between the school and the aged care community. I think, there's certainly a lot of good work going on. When I think of this, I think about being on my Churchill Fellowship when I was in Ohio, and I went to a school that had people with dementia as like teacher assistants, really, and people with early stage dementia went to the classroom every day with the school children. And I can remember saying to the principal, what do the elders do? And she said to me, my teachers, Anne, teach the children to read, but the elders teach the children to love reading. And I thought that was a really nice way of looking at the support that the older people did in the classroom. Now, interestingly enough, because of dementia, the people that were part of that school, their dementia did not progress as quickly as other people, like-minded people and cognitively matched people, as their dementia progressed, which again comes back to what we say and what we know: use it or lose it. And in Montessori, we talk about pushing the brain to work, pushing cognitive function. Don't let people sit and vegetate. And I guess that's a good example. But I also need to say about intergenerational programs that it's a fallacy that all old people like children. I know a lot of old people who find children loud, noisy, with no manners, and they don't want anything to do with them. So I always say any intergenerational, and likewise with older people, by the way, but with any intergenerational program, it really has to be that people want to be part of it and have the option and the choice to not be part of it. And when children come in, into a lounge area, and the elders do not have the option to get up and walk out, or if they're in wheelchairs they can't walk out, they again are captive, and they can find it too noisy and too confronting and all of those things. So fabulous. We just need to be mindful and look at what is the purpose and why are we doing it, and how do we match older people with younger people. And
Anybody else have a comment or question?
I think there's a question in the chat, Mark, around strategies.
Oh, Sumia asks, will some of the strategies you mentioned work for Parkinson's patients too?
Well, yes, the strategies will work for anybody. I'm assuming that you're talking there about activities or fine motor skill activities or whatever. Look, they can work for anybody with correct assessment and what actually does the person need. We always look at, what does that person need and how can we best support that need, or, help them to maintain independence, or be the best that they can be. certainly for people living with, you know, cognitive impairment, you know, if we achieve and enable them to be the best that we can be, how wonderful is that? And so it's exactly the same for somebody who has, you know, chronic arthritis or Parkinson's disease or any other condition that can rob some of their independence or limits them. And so we would always look at what strengths do people have. We're so good in our industry at looking at what people can't do. And we're so good at looking at what people can't do because that's how we're funded. We're funded by what people can't do. And so we're very good at looking at that. But looking at strengths requires a different view. And, you know, I always say even somebody that has a nice smile, if somebody has a nice smile and they can shake hands, that's a strength. And we can use that strength in our care communities. Now, we had a fellow who had a nice smile. He could repeat a sentence and he could shake hands. His job role was that he stood at the dining room door at every meal, and every resident who walked past him was greeted into the meal, and he'd shake their hands, smile at them and say, "It's lovely to see you. It's lovely to see you." You know, that's about, this man didn't know where his room was. He was unable to dress himself. He probably needed his food cut up, but that's what he could do. He could stand at the door, shake hands and smile and welcome people into the dining room. So we always look at, you know, what can people do? Now, I think over in one of the care homes over in Perth that I was working with for a number of years, I think they had something like, you know, 89 residents, and 80 of them had roles. 80 of them contributed to the care community in some way or another, either working in the laundry, setting tables, clearing tables, sweeping the floor, watering the garden, emptying rubbish bins, changing the beds, wheeling the trolleys. The list went on and on. But most of their residents had something to do. That something that they contributed to their care community. They were part of a community. And that is why, you know, Montessori can be so positive in its outcome for people, that people feel engaged. People feel that they've got a reason to get out of bed every day.
And we're almost out of time. But one last question for you. It sounds like, from my takeaway from what you're saying, is that implementing Montessori in aged care, the biggest challenge is the global nature of changing everything.
Yes.
You know, do you think, given that, do you think that Montessori can change the face of aged care in Australia? And if so, what's the key?
Look, the key is really just, you know, to keep pushing the message and, you know, encouraging research and encouraging people to talk about it, encouraging organisations to be brave enough to look at what they do. Now, we found that, you know, with well, they're not new standards anymore, but the aged care standards that changed, you know, a couple of years ago. Montessori's like fits like a glove. So there were quite a few organisations who have gone down the Montessori path, or who are looking at going down the Montessori path, because because it fits the standards so well. But it is, you know, it is a slow revolution, really. It's taken a long time for aged care to get where it is. It's taken a long time for us to be in this position. And, you know, I can't help but, you know, feel very concerned that in, you know, 2021, we needed a Royal Commission into aged care, and the things that came out of that were absolutely horrific, that is happening to our older people, you know, and people with dementia don't have a voice. And, you know, we have to advocate for them, and we've got to advocate for true person-centred care. That's the only way we're going to change you know, the industry as a whole, is to keep it out there, to keep talking about it, to keep challenging, and to keep also looking at ourselves and doing some self-reflection on our own practices and on our own attitudes, you know, towards our elderly people that we're so privileged to care for. You know, even the industry, in terms of, we talk about carers, we employ carers, that even that in itself implies that people are going to care for people. You know, if we're really proactive and we're out there and we're talking about enabling people to be the best that they can be, you know, we have to change language. You know, we have to change language to enablers or supporters, support staff rather than carers. So even language becomes important. You know, if you've got heart failure, we treat you for it. If you've got arthritis, we treat you for it. If you've got dementia, we manage you. You know, even the term, even that, we manage people. You know, whereas, you know, in good dementia care, shouldn't we be, you know, putting in strategies for people to be the best that they can be rather than just manage them? Yeah.
And it's been so inspiring to listen to the passion that you bring to Montessori and aged care. So thank you so much for your time. It was fascinating.
Pleasure. No problem at all. Thank you for your patience. I was a bit worried there. I didn't think it was all going to happen.
And thank you for everybody for coming along tonight. And we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time for another Montessori Lives.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Love listening
you.
to you. Hope to see you in Abu Dhabi one day.
Oh, yes, hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you.